Imagine 50,000 years ago, standing on the edge of a world that shouldn't exist. To your back lies the familiar territory of Southeast Asia, but ahead, across a churning deep blue abyss of open ocean, sits a mysterious southern continent shrouded in mist. The greatest mystery in human migration wasn't how we got to Europe or the Americas. There were no maps, no GPS, and no guarantee that anything but endless water lay ahead. Yet, they made it. Now, thanks to a groundbreaking leap in genetic technology and the analysis of ancient hair samples and genomic sequences, we finally have the answer. New DNA evidence has officially settled the debate on how, when, and exactly which route these first pioneers took to settle the Australian continent 50,000 years ago. What the data reveals isn't just a migration story. It is a testament to the most daring voyage in the history of our species. And the results are rewriting everything we thought we knew about the dawn of human exploration. To truly grasp the magnitude of this discovery, we have to look at what the world looked like back then. 50,000 years ago, the planet was in the grip of the last ice age. Sea levels were much lower because so much water was locked up in massive glaciers near the poles. Because of this, the map of the world was fundamentally different. Southeast Asia wasn't a collection of islands like it is today. It was a giant continuous landmass known as Sunda. Similarly, Australia, New Guinea, and Tasmania were all connected into one gargantuan southern continent called Sahul. But even with lower sea levels, there was a catch. Between the edges of Sunda and the shores of Sahul, there was never a land bridge. Even at the height of the Ice Age, a deep water trench known as the Wallace Line remained. To get from the rest of the world to Australia, you had to cross the ocean. There was no walking across. This means the first Australians weren't just hunters and gatherers wandering over a hill. They were the world's first true mariners. For years, scientists were split into two warring camps about how this happened. One group argued for a northern route through New Guinea, while another pushed for a southern route through the island chain of what we now call Indonesia. The problem was that the tropical environment of these regions is incredibly harsh on ancient remains. Traditional archaeology could only tell us so much, because bones and tools often disappear in the humid, acidic soil over 10,000 years. But DNA doesn't lie, and it has a memory that stretches back through hundreds of generations. By analyzing the mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosomes of Aboriginal Australian populations, and comparing them with ancient hair samples collected nearly a century ago, researchers have reconstructed a genetic map of incredible precision. The DNA evidence shows that the migration wasn't a slow, accidental drift. It was a rapid, purposeful expansion. They moved with a speed that is absolutely breathtaking. Within just a few thousand years, they had colonized the entire perimeter of the continent. But the real aha moment came when the DNA showed a clear split in the genetic lineages. The data suggests that the explorers arrived in a single, primary wave and then divided into two main groups. One group headed east along the northern coast, while the other headed south, hugging the western coastline. This wasn't a random wandering. It was a strategic circumnavigation. They were mapping a new world in real time. But the biggest question remained: how did they get across that deep water gap? This is where the maritime mystery gets truly interesting. The DNA links between Southeast Asia and Australia suggest that the crossing happened roughly 50 to 60,000 years ago. At that time, the gap between the closest islands was still about 50 to 60 miles of open sea. You can't just swim that, and you certainly can't drift across it on a log with an entire community of men, women, and children. The arrival of humans in Australia is the first definitive proof of sophisticated boat building in human history. We are talking about bamboo rafts or outrigger canoes capable of carrying dozens of people, fresh water, and supplies across a horizon where land wasn't even visible. This discovery elevates the first Australians from primitive nomads to the master engineers of the ancient world. The DNA also revealed something surprising about the true origin of these people. By tracing the genetic mutations, scientists have been able to verify that the ancestors of Aboriginal Australians were among the very first groups of modern humans to leave Africa. While other groups were slowly migrating into the cold forests of Europe or the plains of Central Asia, this particular lineage was on a fast track toward the sun. They moved along the coast of India and Southeast Asia, adapting to tropical environments and coastal living. Their DNA shows a long history of thriving in maritime conditions, which likely gave them the skills and the confidence to look at the open ocean of the Wallace Line and say, Let's see what's on the other side. One of the most emotional and powerful aspects of this genetic study is how it validates the oral histories of the Aboriginal people themselves. Many indigenous groups in Australia have songlines or dreaming stories that describe the creation of the land, the rising of the seas, and the ancient journeys of the ancestors. For a long time, Western science treated these as purely symbolic myths. But the DNA evidence matches the movement patterns described in these ancient stories with startling accuracy. The genetic data shows that specific groups have remained in their ancestral territories for tens of thousands of years. We are talking about a continuous connection to a specific piece of land that goes back 50,000 years. In the world of human history, that is unheard of. It makes Aboriginal Australians the oldest continuous living culture on the planet. As the researchers dug deeper into the genomic data, they found evidence of how these early settlers adapted to the unique and often harsh Australian environment. Australia is a land of extremes, from the tropical north to the arid red center and the temperate south. The DNA shows signs of selection for traits that helped people survive in high heat, low water conditions. It's as if the continent itself was carving its history into the very cells of the people who lived there. This genetic resilience allowed them to thrive in an environment that would become isolated from the rest of the world for millennia, creating a biological and cultural snapshot of a time before the great ice sheets fully retreated. But what about the route? The settled science now points toward what is known as the southern route. While a northern path through New Guinea was possible, the genetic data shows a much stronger affinity with the island chain stretching from Java to Timor. This suggests that the first Australians were island hoppers. They likely moved from one visible island to the next until they reached the edge of the continental shelf. From there, they would have had to make the final. This confirms that this was an intentional colonizing mission, not a stray boat blown off course. This discovery also sheds light on the tragic and mysterious disappearance of the megafauna. When humans arrived in Australia 50,000 years ago, the continent was home to giants. Kangaroos the size of bears, monitor lizards 20 feet long, and massive flightless birds. For a long time, while the DNA study is focused on humans, the timing of the human arrival perfectly overlaps with a period of massive ecological change. By having a fixed date for human arrival, settled at 50,000 years, scientists can now see that humans and megafauna coexisted for thousands of years. The technology used to settle this debate is as fascinating as the discovery itself. Scientists utilize something called long-read sequencing. In the past, ancient DNA was often too fragmented to get a clear picture, like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. But new techniques allow researchers to read much longer strands of the genetic code, meaning they can find signatures that were previously invisible. By applying this to hair samples collected by anthropologists in the early 20th century, they were able to bypass the degradation issues found in skeletal remains. This non-invasive method of studying the past is a massive win for both science and indigenous rights, as it allows for deep history to be told without disturbing ancient burial sites. Imagine the first night the explorers spent on the shores of Sahul. They would have seen stars they had never seen before in the southern sky. They would have encountered plants and animals that looked like they belonged on another planet. The DNA shows that these people didn't just survive. They exploded in population. They found a continent of plenty, and they moved through it with purpose. The genetic map shows a pincer movement, where the lineages split at the Kimberley region of Western Australia and raced around the edges of the continent, eventually meeting again in the southeast. This pattern suggests a deep understanding of geography and a highly organized social structure. The implications for our understanding of human intelligence are massive. 50,000 years ago, we usually think of humans as living in small, linguistic communication to coordinate boat crews, and incredible navigational knowledge. You need to know how to store water for multiple days at sea, how to read weather patterns, and how to maintain social cohesion under extreme stress, traveling into a void that no human had ever entered. As we look at the genetic data from different parts of Australia, we see a fascinating stay-out pattern. Once a group established themselves in a specific river valley or coastal region, they stayed there. The DNA shows very little intermixing between distant regions for tens of thousands of years. This indicates that the Aboriginal groups developed a highly specialized knowledge of their local country. They didn't need to wander. They had mastered their specific environment so well that they stayed in place for 40,000 years. This creates a genetic time capsule for each region, giving us a prehistoric record of human life that is unparalleled anywhere else on Earth. But how does this change American history or European history? It shows that the out-of-Africa migration wasn't just a slow walking tour. It was a multifaceted, high-speed expansion that utilized the oceans just as much as the land. It forces us to reconsider other ancient migrations. It makes the crossing of the Bering Strait into the Americas, or the settling of the Pacific Islands, seem like a natural progression of an already existing seafaring culture. More mobile and more adventurous than we gave them credit for, like the Denisovans and Neanderthals. The genetic code of Aboriginal Australians contains a small but significant percentage of Denisovan DNA, a mysterious cousin species that lived in Asia. This piece of the puzzle shows that as the ancestors of the first Australians moved through Sunda, the final settlement of the how they reached Australia debate is a victory for multidisciplinary science. It took the combination of archaeology, linguistics, climate modeling, and cutting-edge genomics to finally see the truth. The Southern Route, the 50,000-year timeline, and the rapid coastal circumnavigation are now the gold standard of Australian prehistory. But science never truly stops. Every answer leads to a new question. Now that we know they arrived 50,000 years ago, scientists are looking for even older sites. Some controversial sediment evidence suggests humans might have been there as early as 65,000 years ago. If the DNA can eventually confirm that even older date, we might have to push the out-of-Africa timeline back even further. Think about the courage of a young man or woman sitting on a bamboo raft, watching the islands of their birth fade into the distance behind them, with nothing but the blue horizon of the Indian Ocean ahead. They were carrying the future of an entire continent in their hands. They carried the seeds of a culture that would create the world's oldest art, the most complex kinship systems, and a deep spiritual bond with the land that remains unbroken to this day. The DNA is just the tool we use to read their story, but the story itself is one of pure human spirit. For the modern descendants of these pioneers, the DNA evidence is a source of immense pride. It provides a biological title deed to the land, proving an ancient and uninterrupted occupancy. The DNA proves that the land was never empty. It was meticulously mapped, settled, and cared for by a group of people who had mastered one of the most difficult journeys in human history. It turns the map of Australia from a vast wilderness into a complex tapestry of ancient nations, each with its own genetic signature and its own deep history. The discovery also highlights the importance of preserving ancient environments. Just as a drained wetland in Florida or a hidden canyon in Idaho can reveal secrets, the caves and rock shelters of Australia are the archives of our species. Sites like Majid Bibi in the Northern Territory or the Devil's Lair in Western Australia are national treasures. As we unlock the secrets of the DNA, we realize that we are just beginning to scratch the surface of our own history. The ancient people of Sahul are speaking to us through the genetic code. As we look toward the future, the Sahul project is expanding. Scientists are now trying to reconstruct the ancient languages of the first Australians to see if the linguistic movements match the genetic ones. They are also looking at the DNA of ancient dingoes and other animals to see how they moved alongside humans. We are building a grand unified theory of Australian history that combines the biological, the cultural, and the environmental. It is one of the most exciting times to be interested in science, as the shadows of the past are finally being illuminated by the light of modern technology. The journey of the first Australians 50,000 years ago is a reminder that we are a species of explorers. Whether it's crossing an ocean on a raft or launching a rocket into space, the drive to see what's over the next horizon is part of our DNA. The settlers of Sahul didn't have compasses or engines, but they had a vision and they had each other. They remind us that the greatest tool we have is our ability to work together and to adapt to the unknown. So the next time you look at a map of the world and see the vast island continent of Australia sitting in the southern oceans, don't just see a remote landmass. See the destination of the greatest voyage of the Ice Age. See the home of the world's oldest living culture, whose story is written not just in the rocks and the trees, but in the very blood that flows through their veins. The DNA evidence hasn't just settled a scientific debate. It has honored a legacy of 50,000 years of human endurance. The story of Australia's settlement is a story of triumph over the impossible. It's a story that belongs to all of us, as it shows what humans are capable of achieving when we are pushed to our limits. From the tropical shores of the north to the snowy peaks of the Tasmanian highlands, the explorers of Sahul left a footprint that the passage of 50,000 years could not erase. We are finally learning to read those footprints, and the path they lead us on is nothing short of miraculous. This discovery is also a lesson in humility for science. It took us a long time to catch up to the knowledge that indigenous Australians have held for generations. It shows that when science and traditional knowledge work together, we get a much clearer picture of our place in the world. The DNA has provided the hard data, but the songlines provided the map. Together, they tell the full story of how we became who we are today. As the research moves forward, who knows what else we will find? Perhaps there are even more ancient human species waiting to be discovered in the islands between Sunda and Sahul. Perhaps the DNA of the first Australians holds even deeper secrets about the origins of our species in Africa. The journey is far from over. Each new discovery is a wing beat of an eagle, carrying us higher and giving us a broader view of our shared human history. The 50,000-year timeline is now a firm reality. It is a milestone in our understanding of the planet. It marks the moment when humans became a truly global species, capable of conquering the barriers of the ocean. The ancestors of the Aboriginal people were the pioneers who proved that no distance was too far and no ocean was too wide. They are the heroes of a story that is as old as the stars and as deep as the sea. In the end, the DNA evidence doesn't just tell us how humans reached Australia, it tells us why. We reached Australia because we are a species that cannot stay still. We reached Australia because we are driven by a need to know what lies beyond. We had the intelligence, the courage, and the technology to make the impossible real. The shores of Sahul were the finish line for one journey, but the starting line for a culture that would stand the test of time longer than any other in history. So, as we close this chapter of scientific discovery, let's take a moment to look south. Let's remember the rafts in the moonlight, the ancient mariners catching the tide, and the moment their feet first touched the red sand of a new world. Their story is our story. Their victory is our victory. And thanks to the incredible power of DNA, their history is finally coming home to the light. The debate is settled, but the wonder is just beginning. Every time we find a new piece of our genetic past, we find a new piece of ourselves. The first Australians have reclaimed their place in the center of the human saga, and the world will never look at the history of migration the same way again. The voyage continues, not just in the past, but in our pursuit of the truths that define our existence on this incredible, ancient planet.